mid-juncture, does it feel familiar at all?
I read the newspaper.
You what, I'm sorry?
I read the newspaper every day.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Any comments on how?
Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I'm just.
Well, disintegration of culture, I mean,
Mhm.
it's the same, it's very similar to what we see today as far as kind of people turning on one another, and I mean, it's just a complete breakdown of society as a whole.
The economy is militating pretty much against the poor, you know. Yeah. The gap between the rich and poor is growing at an astronomical rate, you know.
Mhm.
You know, our own state is in a situation where, if you saw what happened to Parkland College, that's just one, you can go across the board everywhere. Now they're trying to go after pensions and, it's, I don't know.
The have lesses increasingly have less,
Mhm.
and those at the top, just that gap continues to widen, and it's certainly a lot of the rich and the scales and those sorts of things, there's certainly a lot of parallels.
How about Syrian refugees?
It's, again, hard not to have that on your mind, but, they represent, to me, the biblical strangers and sojourners. If you look at, it's just pathetic, what you see. And yet, obviously, because of what happened so recently, people are terrified because 2 out of 10,000 could be the ones that kill your children, So then the question becomes, do you keep them all out and all these people that are really broken that because you have fear for your own life, which a lot of people are saying now, they're saying, we can't, because one of them could be bad or 10 of them, all of them have to go. Well, I personally don't think that's biblical. I don't think the God that is not extending mercy and grace at all, it's not trusting God completely. So but it's obviously really an issue. And it's not going to go away, especially with what just happened in France.
It's fascinating and disturbing to watch Christians discuss this, since there's so much online that they discuss, that you can see the reactions in the church to the refugee, to the other, the foreigner, the alien. And I fundamentally, we've got to be asking about the heart that the Lord has, and are we reflecting that? And it's just, there's quite a range of responses right now.
Well, the problem is so much of the church is so far from really recognizing and experiencing the covenant in its totality that they can't see, they're blind to when and how far. The only reason Israel recognized it was because they were forced to. God went and sent someone to say, look, this is the deal. And unfortunately, I think that, because of how, especially in our culture, we've Americanized Christianity, we've distorted it to fit within our own, definition, to where we so often, and you no more greater evidence on Facebook, how far we are from truly understanding and experiencing the heart of God and what that looks like practically in our lives every day. And so unfortunately, it allows all of this to play out, and it has allowed us to get to where we are.
I follow on Facebook a blogger who is one of my favorites, Jamie, the Very Worst Missionary, and she's really excellent. And she had a post earlier this week about the refugee situation, and I won't even go into that, but the premise of it was when we have all become scribes and Pharisees, hope is lost, basically. And of course there are, a million comments after following a post like that. And I was just scrolling through them to kind of get a sense of what, even among the people who follow her, there were some posting pretty strong disagreements with that. And one lady had actually posted a comment that said, I don't understand why you found it necessary to include a word of profanity that had been in the post, in the same post where you talk about the Bible, and that really prevented me from being able to hear anything else you had to say. And that is not being real, that is being ungodly. And then she had quoted a scripture. And you know, in a lot of formats where you hear someone who's like a well-known Christian personality or whatever, the response to that would be something gracious and measured and whatever. And Jamie, this is the reason why a lot of people who follow her, said, basically, in response to that, well, what's real actually is death and terrorism and refugee camps and dysentery and your disgusting willfulness to remain completely ignorant of what really matters in favor of being offended personally over some completely irrelevant. And then she proceeded to insert the same bad word again. And the person was like, well, I am not personally offended. I was just trying to say that I don't think it's appropriate. And then Jamie responded again and said, well, now you're just lying. And to me, I thought, like, that it so perfectly typifies what we're talking about here in what you just said in terms of moving so far away from the covenant. Like, it was not only a step removed away from it on the issue being discussed, it was so many steps away from it that we couldn't even discuss the issue being discussed because we were so busy discussing the words we were using to discuss the issue being discussed, right?
You're straining out gnats.
Yeah, I just think, right, I thought how perfectly symbolic of the entire issue.
I think this is an interesting bellwether though, because I'm interested to see how the church responds, whether they, because there's pretty much a kind of compassion dividing line now about, because of the fear, which is legitimate, One of the most disturbing things was some leader coming out and saying, well, we should take the Christian refugees, not the Muslim refugees, which was, actually said by a national public figure. And I'm not saying everybody agrees with it, anybody can say anything a la Donald Trump, anybody can say anything.
Well, I know.
But the truth of the matter is that it's said and it gets out there, and the people that are not really open to the Lord, they hear that stuff and they go,
Right.
oh my God, I thought these people were supposed to be the people that cared about
Right.
the broken and the poor and whatever. And I think, but right now the polls are going against including the refugees because people are just terrified.
30 states, the last I saw. Is it up? Is it
I
further?
don't know,
The
it's,
governors are afraid.
yeah, and so it's just,
Well, the problem is because it's become politicized. And, unfortunately,
right.
that's what has happened too often within the church, is our leadership have become politicians themselves.
Right.
So instead of really seeking to follow after what the covenant is instructing, they're gonna take polls to determine which way the winds blow within the congregation, determine how I approach a situation,
Right.
as opposed to just adhering to truth and just being bound by that.
There's a headline this week where the National Association of Evangelicals voted to support bringing refugees in, but the headline was Evangelicals break with Republicans. And that headline to much.
Interesting.
And that's what.
Yeah, because they voted, the leadership of that group voted to join several
Right.
other groups, to advocate for bringing in refugees. And I go, that's telling, just how.
But I think this is reflected though, we're talking on a really large scale. But I also think that this is reflected in a lot of ways. This text brings it all the way down, as you point out, into the closest personal relationships. And I think we're affected by those mindsets. I understand that, in terms of politics and national issues and those types of things, but I think the effects of that same mindset are just as present at every level. And I think in our individual churches, it's the same thing. So, I'm coming from, and I don't know that I think that that's necessarily a recent development. I've quoted Vern a lot of times when I attended his retirement, whatever,
Speech.
yeah,
Gala.
whatever that big
Sermon.
fancy thing was that you did. And what that thing you said about sometimes the church is a beautiful flower and sometimes it's an ugly weed, right? And I think in some ways that's always been true. So, you know, I mean, I grew up in the church and VBS and church camp and Bible college, and I think, so for any of us who have had, for any of us, as long as we've been associated with the church, I think we can all probably point to some really
Beautiful flowers.
beautiful flowers and ugly weeds, and some really, you know, personally impactful and hurtful experiences in which these types of things played out. For myself personally, when I was in the middle of going through a divorce, I actually had someone say to me, I won't list all the outrageous things, just one, I'll just pick one really good one. Someone said to me, you should really be careful to cross all your biblical T's and dot your I's because you just want to be really sure. I don't even know what that means. Like, yes, let's make sure we whip out that heavenly checklist and get everything correct. I mean, and I think we have a tendency, even, you know, on the most personal level. Yeah, exactly. To,
Well, the thing is, I think too, what Nathan was saying, reflecting on this some, is I think let's go deeper, because what's really happening, be quiet, Siri. What's really happening is that, I think that, I'm gonna say this is gonna sound terribly judgmental, but I think it's true. I don't know if the church believes in God. I don't know if the church really believes that God is real and will really act and do stuff in history. I know we say that, and I'm talking about myself too. I think what happens, I think this whole terrorist refugee thing is really putting everything in bas relief, because when I've talked to people in the last few days, it's been like, you know, Christians, they say, you know, it is pretty clear that these refugees represent the sojourners and the strangers and the aliens, okay? And we know pretty clearly what the Bible says we should do in relationship to them. But on the other hand, we have so much fear, and you know, it's legitimate fear. I'm going to New York City in a few days with my whole family, and we're supposed to go to the Macy's Day Parade, and my daughter-in-law, who's a believer, and I'm not criticizing her, is saying, I don't know if I want to go down there. Because, you know, I don't know if you saw the
Right.
news this morning, they put out a video that they're gonna attack New York City. And, you know, the powers that be said, well, this is just like the other stuff, you know, and this is like the other stuff, and, you know, and we've heard this stuff here, blah, blah. And this one little reporter lady said, yeah, they were kind of saying that before Paris too, you know. So the point of the matter is, the fear is legitimate and it's powerful, and so.
my 12-year-old asked me at dinner tonight, is Stephen marching in the Macy's Day Parade? And I was like, honey, Stephen's marching in the Farmer City Christmas Parade.
But I mean, that's the kind of, so what I'm saying.
It's probably safe,
fear-
I don't know.
Probably
It's
Farmer
gonna
City
be
is not a
okay.
correct term. Okay.
Fear,
How
If
do
they
you think
really
he
wanna
was
mess with
getting?
their minds,
Okay, Farmer
but
City.
anyway,
Oh, really? That's how far down
I
what
know.
you're saying,
the
yeah.
fear is so overwhelming that, and the fact that, you know, no matter what words you speak, those people were attacked, killed, and unprotected, you know, and you know, and terrible. So the point is that then you put up the biblical thing of, well, God wants you to do this, but then when you say about the fear, then it's partly, and I find it myself too, saying, you know, is God really there if this kind of stuff would happen? That's a lot of what I think people have afraid of, you know. My daughter-in-law is a believer, and yet, you know, when I go to the Macy's parade, am I sure that God won't allow this to happen? No, you know? And so, but even if it does happen, does that invalidate God? No. You know, and if we bring in the refugees and two of them turn out to be terrorists and kill my kids, which, you know, beyond devastation, does that mean God isn't real, that he didn't? I mean, no. And that's where that faith is, and that's really hard. And I don't know to the degree that we teach that from the Pope. I don't know if we teach
Right.
that.
I
In fact, just give myself I think that what is missing a lot is a biblical worldview or point of view. These things are not a surprise. If you think that the stuff that happened in Europe and everything and what's gonna happen is a surprise, man is depraved.
It's shocking, but
that's,
it's.
that's,
You know, should anybody be surprised that this stuff would happen? No.
That's why I
No.
always am a bit hesitant or resistant of the notion, I heard it several times, at a thing I was at where they were talking about change and talking about, the world changed at 9/11. Well, actually, no, the world didn't
No.
change at 9/11.
Yeah, you
That's
ever heard-
consistent
you
with
ever
what
heard
we're
of
looking at
Holocaust?
here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what strikes me is all this conversation and what led to your, why you asked the question is,
Yeah.
this sounds terribly familiar because we're experiencing the same thing in our generation. Most generations have. I mean, that's, so when we drift from living out that covenant relationship with each other, this is what occurs.
Twin Towers, Nazi Germany, I mean, come on.
Well, it's funny because, a lot of Christians will go and, if they hear what we would call a health and wealth kind of gospel,
Yeah.
oh, they're gonna get real kind of righteously upset about that. But in all honesty, American Christianity is just varying degrees of health and wealth gospel. I mean, we tend to approach it from this perspective of, it means I'm going to be safe, secure, all of the pluses, and without recognizing that I have to take up my own cross, and that the living like God would have me live, welcoming in these strangers, doesn't mean I'm going to be secure and safe. And so we want to embrace those things that bring positive attributes to our life without willing to recognize that there's so much more sacrifice to be had than there is gained in choosing to follow after Christ. And unfortunately, that's the reality that we're unable or unwilling to recognize.
Well, I think it's the same thing on a personal level. I think Randy Boltinghouse does, in my opinion, a better job than a lot of people in kind of frequently drawing back to that, Jesus is not a moral self-help system that makes everything in your life work. This is not about a system that makes everything in your life work. Because I think that, that's what I meant by drawing it back before to that whole thing about, it's the same kind of thing, like it's not overtly health and wealth, but we tend to get this approach, like if we do everything perfectly right, then it's all gonna go right. And if you raise your kids like this, then they're gonna be healthy, happy, and love Jesus, and you're gonna, none of these things will ever happen.
None of the bad stuff.
None of the bad
Yeah.
stuff. And right, it'll all work.
You
And
can read scripture and miss.
Didn't work out that way for Job.
Right, exactly.
Don't recall the Apostle Paul, I like it.
And so I think one of the things that, I'm not even gonna give a book reference because it's not a book about this, and you'll go look at it and be like, why did she get that out of this book? It's a book about a completely different thing. But for me, it was, I think, a realization for someone born and raised in the church like myself. Sadly, I had to come as an adult to the shocking realization that serving God for personal gain is serving God for personal gain. And it doesn't matter whether it's this kind of personal gain with the wrong measures and it's still, this is not about serving God. This is just about personal gain, but it doesn't matter whether you're getting personal gain by cheating people in the marketplace or you're getting personal gain by trying to manipulate God into personal gain. That's still about yourself. And so I think from the tiniest, most personal level all the way up to the most global level, that's what's at the bottom, is that it's about self, right? And until our orientation to that changes so that self isn't at the center, even our attempts, I think, at holiness, and that's what's reflected in this text. Can we sacrifice? Can we serve better? Can we love better? Can we do better? Can we be better? And it just simply isn't about that, because that's still about us. And so I think, to me, that's the shift. It's not about doing or not doing bad things. It's just simply about not being the center of it.
The irony that they are willing to do all these big things for God, and all this other sin is right there settled,
Right there.
and we're not going to do anything about that. We'll actually do something really impressive for the church, and cheat you
Right.
and defy God and say we're fine.
Right.
Well, the cheating is where they get the money to be able to afford to do.
Absolutely, sure.
So-
It all works. The system works. It's great.
Circular, you know.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you're sensing that this doesn't sound too unfamiliar. I mean, the danger when you're reading 8th century Judah is that people start saying, yeah, it's 8th century Judah, and I don't have an ephah. It's like, no, actually, there's a lot of this that's
Very real.
exactly the same, and we have it, Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun. We are still in the same dang place because the
Except now it's
struggles.
worldwide.
I'm sorry?
Now it's worldwide, we're
And-
not just talking about Judah.
Yeah,
We're
it
talking
is
about the
worldwide.
entire earth and all the
Yeah,
nations.
but once your language, dang, is really.
I'm sorry, actually, if you'd like me to leave at this point.
I'm
we
not gonna
won't
be able to
finish
focus
the
on the
whole-
rest of the
I
lesson.
Yeah, just forget the whole thing.
We can't
You just-
hear any of the rest of what you said.
Okay,
No,
okay, well, I'll go home, that's fine. Blew that one, gosh.
Therefore, God. Actually,
See, I'm just driving it deep there, buddy. My foul mouth. Well, yeah, the reason I paused to ask that, and I think that's actually a really good discussion, rather than the planned discussion, is sort of like, this is really like our society, because we're sinful and we defy God and go our own way, and we don't really care for the covenant, which is still in effect, and God still loves us, and we still have a history with God, and we disregard that and do all kinds of other things. And one of the things that I love about the prophets, and I think this is missing in the church, and I think this is really an issue, is that the prophets really have an edge to, a spiritual edge to them that the church doesn't have. And I'm not pointing at any one church, I'm kind of looking across the board at
Right.
Bible-believing churches. We can justify a lot of sin.
Mhm.
And I know that if Isaiah or Micah or Hosea or Amos were hanging around, they would not be okay with that. And we kind of are. So that's, you know, I look at this 8th century, this whole expose of, guys, here's what's going on, here's what's in your hearts, here's what you're letting happen, which is why the prophets are so valuable. At the same time, it's something that just is often not there in 21st century Christianity.
Well, but one of the things is disintegration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't, especially in this country, I'm sure more other people feel it more than I do as a middle class guy, but, you know, there is a sense of disintegration starting to be felt in relationships with the economy and, you know, what's happening. You know, that things are not necessarily holding together worldwide, you know. That, you know, I mean, there's, you know, that's happening to a degree. Now, you know, you can be, you know, alarmist and say, well, you know, chicken little, the world's totally falling apart. I don't think it necessarily happens that way. I think it's more incremental. I think it's happening incrementally, and it's very scary. I mean, even those of us now, like for example, I'm a middle-class guy with enough money to take my family to New York for you know, Thanksgiving, and yet now all of a sudden there's this thing about what might happen.
Sure.
And then also, you know, I read in the paper 2 days ago, you know, they're fighting about the pensions. That's all I got, you know.
Mhm.
I don't know if they'll take it away or they'll reduce it or whatever. And of course, if they did, I wouldn't be probably as poor and well, you know, as poor off as some other people already are. But nonetheless, it's threatening, and so there's that.
Sure.
And disintegration is like that. It's not like a collapse thing. It's more like a edges, you know.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like that kind of thing. And I think people have a sense of that. Have a
Sure.
sense of, you know, like, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? What do we do about this? It doesn't seem to be going well. How do we turn it back?
Mhm.
You know, and that's pretty.
That's the problem, nobody sees how.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
They're
we're willing-
blind, they're blind
Or
to-
are willing to cooperate to get anything done.
Right.
Which is a big hallmark now of our government, is we won't talk to each other when we can't go forward. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and that's what I love about this passage in Micah. It's funny, you know, he has given you